Hey, I'm Mike with vidmuse.com here with another exciting tutorial. Well, a lot of you have been giving me lots of questions. Just what the heck is ISO, aperture, shutter speed? What are these things with our cameras? What do they do? Help us! Well, you didn't quite word it that way, but that's my interpretation of it. Now, we want to keep this stuff moving. We don't want to keep it slow. You know, it's like, this isn't school, okay? Who can tell me what ISO stands for? No one? International Standards Organization. So yes, ISO, International Standard Organization, has nothing to do with cameras. I don't know why they would use that acronym ISO. Okay, so just stick to ISO, forget the International Standard Organization crap. So when I go set up my lights, or if I don't have lights, just go outside or shoot wherever I'm at, the first step is start with your ISO. Now ISO is the film sensitivity. Now we obviously don't have film in these cameras, but it's how sensitive the camera is to light. So when you go outside and whoa, it's really bright out here, you know, you have to adjust and set your ISO to start with. So if I'm outside where there's lots of light, I'm going to go with a very low ISO, like 320 or below. Now if it's really dark outside, if it's a nighttime scene, you have very little light, you need to boost it as high as you can. Now for video and the 7D, I would not go above ISO 800. The higher you go, if you go beyond that 1250, you're going to start to see some pretty nasty noise, and then further up from there, 6400, it's just like, I'm blind, is it bad? If it's an emergency and you gotta use 1250, go ahead, okay? Nobody will, you know, kill you over it, but I don't like using 1250, 800 or below. So again, the higher that ISO, the more sensitive your camera is to light, or the more sensitive the film is to light, and it will be brighter. Next, we have our aperture. This all takes place in your lens. Now the aperture, it's kind of like the pupil of your eye, so you know, if you're doing something you shouldn't be and your pupils are dilated and... Here's this camera. Runs on water, man. Runs on water. Wait, what? So aperture in your lens is a lot like the pupil in your eye. You know, you go outside and whoa, everything's bright. Well, believe it or not, your pupil shrinks down. Well, the same way works with a lens. Now, you've got blades, inner blades that actually open and close into a nice, like, circular, slightly octagon kind of shape in there with the different blades that come together, and it actually cuts light down. Now, you can control, as a lot of you have heard this word, depth of field with your aperture. The smaller that aperture, the higher the number. So the word f-stop. Well, what does f-stop mean? Well, it means focal range. You know, this lens is a focal, or an f2.8, and it can go all the way down to f22. So at f2.8, that thing is wide open, it's letting all the light in, and my depth of field is very, very narrow as far as what's in focus. So if I'm shooting, you know, and I'm at 2.8, you know, you got a very small range of what's in focus, and you can move that focus point as you focus your lens and move it in and out and find that focal point. Now, if we went down to f22, obviously we're cutting the light down, so your scene is going to be much darker, so you need to have the proper lighting to compensate for that. The depth of field broadens and gets very, very wide, so then more is in focus and you're not depending on such a small range. So your lenses, you know, in the video world, you know, you guys are like, oh yeah, this L-series lens is awesome, it's 1.2. You know how hard it's going to be to try to keep your subject in focus? Now, if you're doing an interview shot, literally, you can have the eye in focus and the nose is going to be out of focus. That nose will be slightly blurry. So, you know, it's not always best in the video world to have a very low f-stop. 2.8 is sometimes hard to shoot with. In this video that we're shooting, we're actually shooting at f8. So we're cutting it down. So when I'm in focus, my camera is more in focus. You got to keep that in mind. So your aperture controls, again, lighting will darken or lighten your scene, but it also controls your depth of field. Then the last thing we have is shutter speed. So this camera, along with a lot of the Nikons, are a single lens reflex, hence the digital DSLR. So DSLR, digital single lens reflex. You've got your lens coming in, and then you've got the chip or sensor that your image is captured on. Well, there's a door in front of that blocking it right now, and there's a mirror in there with some prisms, so the light comes in and shoots up into our viewfinder, so we can actually look and see actually through that lens. And then when we go and take the picture, the mirror whips out of the way, and that barn door opens, again, exposing the sensor, and then quickly shuts down again. When you take a photo and you hear the actual, the actual shutter itself, the mechanical shutter, the mirror coming out of the way, the door opening and closing, video shutter speed, it's all internal and more of a digital shutter speed. So your mechanical shutter is not opening and closing 60 times. Your camera's lifetime would be about 5 minutes. So in the video world, when you've got, say, a 60th of a second, you see your shutter speed's at 60th, that shutter is going up and down 60 times per second. I mean, it is booking it, man. Now, the 7D can go up to 4,000ths of a second. So you say, well, what shutter speed should I use for what? Well, again, the slower the shutter speed, let me mention this. So if you are shooting at, say, 24p and you're at 48th of a second, the shutter speed is going up 48 times a second. That's actually allowing a lot of light to come in because it's up, light's coming in, coming down. Now, if we cranked it all the way up to, say, 500th of a second, it's actually cutting light down. So the higher that shutter speed, you're cutting more light down. So you can kind of see with the ISO, the aperture, and your shutter speed, you're going to end up with a type of exposure at the end. So all of these take a part in what you need to do. You do have to keep in mind that the slower the shutter speed, your image becomes blurred or smeared or motion blurred, as a lot of you know the term. And some of you like that effect, and it can be used for an effect, but whenever I'm shooting, especially a film, I never ever want to do that. I would always light the scene the way I need, get my nice clean crisp images, and then slow it down or blur that in post, because you can create that effect in post. You don't have to do it in camera. Now, the reason why I would say go with a higher shutter speed is because you want your images to be crisp and clean. So if I'm outside and I'm shooting at ISO 160 and I'm at f9 because, again, I want a broad depth, and then I'm shooting at, say, 500th of a second, I want to get a nice cleaner, crisper image because, again, that shutter speed is going up and down and it allows more detail to be captured. So if you're ever doing like Twixtor or doing 60p and you're doing a slow motion effect, always do a high shutter speed, like 200 or more. Just crank it up there. Again, if you have the light. Now, to save you all confusion, okay, the higher the shutter speed, again, this doesn't affect frame rate. It's a fourth element here that kind of messes with things. Now, this camera will shoot 24 frames a second, 30 frames a second, and 60 frames a second. Now, again, the shutter speed does not change your frame rate. Okay, so visualize it like this. If you're shooting at 24 frames a second, okay, you've got just a segment of video and you've cut it in 24 slices over 1 second. If you're at 1,000th of a second with your shutter speed, that shutter opened and closed 1,000 times over those 24 slices. Okay, so again, it doesn't affect frame rate. It's not going to gather you more information as if we shot it at 1,000 frames a second. Again, it's going to give you a crisp image with no motion blurring because that shutter's going up and down and your detail is going to be captured and your movement's going to be clean and you're not going to see that blurred effect. But again, doesn't affect your frame rate, so don't get confused on that. I hope that was helpful for you guys, shed a little bit more light, but shed some more light on the mysteries of the DSLRs. Again, I'm Mike with VidMuse. Thanks again. See you next time.